Yo, new bacteria just dropped. And when I say dropped, I mean from space. How is something like this even possible? Let's get into it. So, there are tens of thousands of bacteria that we know about, and we're constantly finding new ones. Been at this for a few centuries now. Some scientists have speculated that there are potentially millions or billions of undiscovered bacteria on Earth. And honestly, that kind of makes sense. Bacteria are super small and absolutely everywhere. Some, known as extremophiles, are incredibly hardy, and if you couldn't guess by the name, they live in some of the most extreme places on Earth. The most common example of organisms like this are ones that live near hydrothermal vents in deep oceans. These vents can be under miles of ocean, so the pressure down there gets really, well, extreme, and the water coming out of these vents can be up to 400 degrees Celsius. In freedom units, that's about 750. So these conditions make them a little bit hard to study. So there are probably tons of extremophiles that we just haven't discovered, simply because we can't really get to where they are and study them. Extremophiles is actually a really interesting topic in and of itself. So if you want to see a video about some of the most extreme organisms on Earth, let me know in the comments. And even of the bacteria that are in more accessible environments, there are so many that we'll probably never have a complete catalog. There are also bacteria in super remote places that aren't really a high priority to study. So there are probably millions or billions of bacteria in thick forests, deep lakes, and honestly, those don't super matter to humans that much. So scientists aren't really worried about getting all of those studied anytime soon. A good example of some of these really remote lakes is Lake Vostok. I think that's how you say it, which is a lake that is in Antarctica. Or maybe I should say under Antarctica. It's another really interesting topic. If you want me to go more in depth about this lake, it's really wild. Let me know in the comments, and I could totally make a video about that. Bacteria also have a really short generation time. This means two important things. Firstly, they can get the population numbers of a new colony up really, really quickly. Some bacteria have been observed to be able to double their population in about 20 minutes. Now, this is under ideal circumstances, which means perfect temperature, perfect pH, plenty of food, all of that kind of stuff. And that almost never happens in nature, but they are capable of that. Now, assuming that I did the math right, and that might not be a safe assumption, this means that they would be able to grow from one bacteria to this number in a single day. That's over 2 quintillion. In humans, a generation takes about 25 years. Now, this can vary pretty significantly depending on what era of human history you're looking at, what culture you're looking at, and of course, differences in individuals themselves. But 25 is generally a pretty safe average for most of human history. So that means that in a day, bacteria can get through enough generations that would basically take human history back to almost Jesus times, or about 1800 years in total. And in a matter of a few years, a colony of bacteria could have more generations than humans have ever had since their first appearance. Now, think about how much humans have changed over the course of history. Physically, we haven't changed a ton, though the average human height has increased quite a bit. Even in the past 100 years or so, we've gotten a few inches taller. Though, interestingly, in the past couple of decades, that's started to go back down a little bit. Anyway, mentally and physiologically, we've improved quite a bit. We've gotten smarter, faster, more complicated, and even formed societies. These non-physical changes might not feel as much like evolution as a fish learning to walk, but it's arguably more significant. Anyway, that's a sidetrack for another time. The main point here is that in those hundreds of thousands of years since we've become human, we've changed and adapted quite a bit. Now, in a single generation, not much can change about a species, which is why you have to look back a few hundred or even a few thousand years to see significant changes in humans. But when you have a generational period of 20 minutes, those changes can compound really, really quickly. And those changes would be more significant in an extreme environment, such as space. Now, to be clear, being in space doesn't inherently mean that these changes are more likely to happen. But what it does mean is that when a positive adaptation occurs, the organism or organisms with the adaptation will be able to more easily outcompete the ones who don't have the adaptation. This is true for any kind of organism that's living in an extreme environment, and this means that pretty quickly the whole population will be those with the new adaptation. For example, space is a pretty radioactive place. On Earth, we're protected by Earth's magnetic shell, but in space, there's nothing to deflect the radiation. So, if an organism gets a random mutation that helps to produce a biofilm that reduces radiation damage, that organism would be able to live longer and thus get to reproduce more than the ones who didn't get that mutation. And that's more or less what happened with this space bacteria. So, let's get into the actual story now. A new bacteria called Nealia tiangongensis was discovered on a Chinese space station. The space station was called Tiangong, which is where they got part of the name for the bacteria from. This bacteria was discovered when they were taking sample swabs from various parts of the station. This was part of a study to basically see how bacteria handled being in space. And boy, were these bacteria handling it. So, as you probably already noticed, they're part of the genus Nealia, which is a genus of gram-positive rod-shaped bacteria in the family Bacilliaceae from the order Bacillels. I don't know if I said either of those right. Their closest relative is Nealia circulans, but over the years in space, they've gone through a few changes. So the main adaptations they have are all things that make them a little bit more resilient and able to survive and thrive in a space setting. Mainly, they have unique protein features that help them form biofilms to help protect themselves, helps them handle oxidative stress, and helps them repair radiation damage. Now, for any who aren't aware, being able to handle oxidative stress basically just means that they can get rid of harmful reactive oxygen species, or ROSs, that are byproducts of metabolism that can damage the bacteria. That was a new one for me too. I had to look that up. There were some other observed adaptations as well, but the big ones are those ones that helped them survive in space. So let's talk timeline real quick. How quickly was this new bacteria able to come up? So the Tiangong space station went up in 2011, and these samples were originally collected a few years ago in 2023. They were basically frozen and then sent to Earth for further study. So if the forefathers of these bacterias went up there right at the beginning, that means they've had about 12 years to evolve and adapt to living in space. That means there potentially could have been hundreds of thousands of generations. I wasn't able to find any specific data on how fast Nealia circulans reproduces, and even if I could find any of those numbers, we don't necessarily know that's how quickly they were reproducing in the space station. There's a ton of factors that can go into how quickly a bacteria reproduces, so it's hard to say exactly how many generations these things have been able to go through. And by the way, Nealia circulans is the one that is most genetically close to this new bacteria, so that's why I was kind of using that as a reference. But anyway, even if it took a full day, which is really, really long by bacteria standards, that would have been enough time for about 100,000 generations. By the way, humans have only had about 12,000 generations from when they first appeared, just to kind of put that in perspective. And so if you were watching this and you were born before 2011, you have been around for this species' entire existence. That's absolutely wild. Well, you've been down here living your life. The entire history of this new species has happened in a small control room up in space. That is absolutely wild. Now, when I think about evolution, I usually think of this unseen force guiding us that exists on such a huge timescale that we can't really perceive it in any kind of meaningful way. But in the case of these bacteria, we were actually able to see evolution firsthand. over about a decade, we were able to see a fully new species come up, a species that specifically is adapted to living in space. Now, I know for some, bacteria might not be the most exciting subject, but for me, being able to witness a new species like this is kind of like catching a glimpse of God, you know? It's just such an amazing thing that honestly, I have trouble really talking about like how impactful and how amazing it is. So, I guess I'm just going to end the video there. If you liked this video, if you thought this stuff was interesting, if you want to hear me talk more about microbiology or evolutionary biology, give me a like, give me a subscribe, let me know in the comments, and I will see you guys next time. Nyalia tiangonensis, Basiliaceae,